Last week, I showed you how the global monetary system is changing right before our very eyes and why understanding this is the key to understanding what we're seeing today. In this video, we're gonna look at the facts of what's happening to the US dollar right before our eyes today. And if you're not paying attention to this, you are going to lose. You do not wanna miss this, so stay tuned. All right, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the end of the global standard, and this is part 2. We talked about part 1 last week. If you haven't watched it, you might want to go back and watch it, or watch this one first. Either way, it doesn't really matter the sequence. We're going to build on top of it. Now, if you're new to the channel, on Thursdays we talk about investing, we talk about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, dollar, gold, etc. I believe the best asset class to invest in today. On Tuesdays, we talk about before you invest, your business success, saving money so that you can invest more. But today we're in it. We're talking about investing because the world is changing fast. And for those that are paying attention, we're gonna have a massive opportunity. Now, one announcement real quick. I do have a podcast, Market Disruptors podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere that you listen to your podcast, Market Disruptors. Check it out. Each and every week, twice a week, I sit down with a high-level person in the blockchain cryptocurrency space, people that are building products and high-level investors, and I ask them the questions you would want to ask them if you had the opportunity. I believe success leaves clues, so we ask them the questions to learn from them so we can make better choices and better decisions today. We can have that edge that we need in the market. So download the Market Disruptors podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. All right. So getting right into it, we are talking about the end of the global dollar standard. Now this is, again, like I said, part 2. We talked about part 1 last week, where we kind of went back through history and showed the global reserve standards, the global dollar standards back since the 1400s, and how they've changed hands about every 100 years. The US dollar is like the second longest running one as it stands today. And then we broke down the last transfer because it's important to understand how these transactions, these transfers work. Because that way we can understand what we're seeing today and have some context for that. So if you haven't watched it yet, we'll go ahead and link back to part 1, and I'd highly recommend that you go back and watch that, but you can finish watching this one first. Now, let's talk about this new system. So we're jumping all the way into 1974. Again, in video 1, we started back in the 1400s. We're at 1974. So what happened is, let's just recap really quickly. Britain was a superpower. The sterling was the reserve currency of the world. The US dollar took over in 1944. There was a Bretton Woods agreement, which basically every country in the world agreed that the dollar would be the world superpower, the dollar would be the reserve currency, and that the dollar would be backed by gold. So all the countries put their gold in the US, they guarded it. They said, okay, we're gonna print dollars, paper dollars at the time, $35 for every 1 ounce of gold that we have, and then all the currencies of the world pegged to the dollar. So basically everyone was pegged to the gold. They were pegged to the dollar was pegged to gold, right? And so from 1944, that worked great. And what happened is, basically, the US said, well, we want more money. And I know we agreed to keep it $35 an ounce, but we want more money. So we're going to print more money. And they printed 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 more money. And as they inflated, right? Inflated the money supply. And as they inflated the money supply, there was more dollars. They weren't really worth $35 for an ounce of gold. And what happened is, a lot of the countries around the world were like, hey, we know what you're doing over here, and so we're just going to take the gold. Here, take our dollars back. You said you'd give us an ounce of gold for every 35. So here's your dollars back, give us the gold. Here's your dollars back, give us gold. And for a few decades, this was happening. And the US dollar they knew what was going on. They knew the game was up. And so basically, the US dollar was just getting rid of all the gold to protect that peg, right? To protect that peg. Finally, the US lost who knows how much gold. We don't really know. It's not audited. I would venture that we don't have as much gold as people think we do in the United States. However, finally, the US threw up its hands and said, that's it. We're not exchanging gold for dollars any longer. You've got us. The game is up and we're done. And President Richard Nixon, 1971, closed it. Done. Took off the peg from the dollar, from gold, and no longer that. Okay. So then what? What's the dollar pegged by then? Why would anybody still use it? So what happened is next is a secret little deal. A secret little deal where the US and Saudi Arabia went into this deal in 1974 And they created a new system. So instead of the dollar being backed by gold, they said the dollar would be backed by oil. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into the petrodollar, but it's very interesting. So make sure to Google it, watch more YouTube videos if you're interested in the petrodollar. But basically, the dollar was pegged by gold. Now it's pegged by oil. And at the time, oil prices were skyrocketing. The Fed was printing all this money, all this inflation, right? And the Arab had this oil embargo. They couldn't sell the oil. And so the USA and Saudi, they made this deal. And basically what happened is the US told Saudi Arabia, look, if you agree to always sell oil in dollars, because all the countries in the world had to buy oil. And so if you always sell it in dollars, they'll all be forced to use dollars still. If you agree to do that, then the USA, we will agree to always protect you. We got your back. No matter what happens, we have your back as long as you keep the dollar pegged to, or the oil pegged to dollar, all right? So since then, that's why the US and Saudi Arabia have this special deal. Saudi Arabia enforces the US dollars and the US protects Saudi Arabia. Now, I'm not going to go deep into a lot of the stuff that's happened with Saudi Arabia and the US, but it's definitely interesting and some of you guys might want to go explore on your own. Some of you guys might remember around 9/11 that George Bush was secretly flying out Saudi Arabia family out of the country. When that happened, when there was no fly zone, now you know why Saudi Arabia gets special treatment. It's the special deal, all right? We're not gonna go super deep into that, go do your own research on that. But that's the new system. So dollar was pegged by gold, now it's pegged by oil. And that goes, and basically that explains why what's going on in the Middle East is going on, right? Notice that all these conflicts in the Middle East are all around oil, right? Whether that be with Syria, because now Russia is trying to get in the mix and try to get the oil. It was Saddam Hussein, because Saddam Hussein was selling oil in euros. Whatever it is, with Iran, it's always about the oil, all this. And really, it's not about the oil, okay? This is what's crazy. It's not about the oil. It used to be about the oil. It's not about the oil. It's about the dollar. The US produces enough energy in the United States onshore to be completely independent of all the other countries. We don't even need to buy oil. We can just produce our enough oil. Why wouldn't we just produce our own oil instead of buying oil and giving our money to, countries that are supporting terrorism? Wouldn't that make more sense? But it's not about the oil. It's about protecting the dollar, all right? And we know as much because we've even heard politicians come out and say that recently. Recently, Rep Brad Sherman came out. He's a rep from California, and he said we need to make cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin illegal for U.S. citizens to own because they undermine the U.S. dollar's reserve status. So we want to make it illegal because we want to preserve the reserve status. And he said it gets rid of our ability to slap sanctions on these countries and breaks our petrodollar. And he said this, exactly what I'm telling you right now. He came out and said this to a House committee. Just Google the video. It came out a couple months, maybe a month or two ago. You can go find that, all right? Rep Brad Sherman. Now, so because of this, the US dollar has been used as a weapon. The US is doing anything they can to protect the US dollar as the reserve currency because as long as we do that, we can print more. You ever wonder why other countries see massive inflation and then fall apart? It's because they can't. They try to print money, but they can't do it because they're not the reserve currency. The U.S. is. And so in order to do that, we're trying to protect it any way we can, whether it be going to physical war or using the dollar as a weapon. And so we slap sanctions and sanctions and sanctions on you and sanctions on you. And basically what those sanctions are is we're kicking countries out of the U.S. banking system. So Russia, you're kicked out of the banking system. And Iran, you're kicked out of the banking system, and on and on and on. And as you might imagine, countries get tired of that, right? Nobody likes that. And what happens is, we see this in other areas of life, eventually you push so many people out that you're the one on the outside. That's what happens. And that's what we're starting to see. So this has been a slow and steady decline. Now, if you watch part one, you'll notice how the transition from the sterling to the US dollar was also a slow and steady decline. And we're seeing the same thing. So like I said, we've been slapping sanctions. Countries are getting tired of it. In 2014, 23 different countries formed a bilateral trade agreement. So they said, you know what? Forget the dollar. we'll just trade amongst ourselves. We don't even need the dollar anymore. So we had 23 countries, boom, move over and just start doing these bilateral agreements. Now it's so many, I can't even count them up. There's so many. In 2015, Russia and China started trading oil outside of US dollars. So remember, the oil was protecting the US dollar, but now there's other countries that have oil. Saudi Arabia is not the only country anymore. So now there's other countries and they're like, well, you didn't make a deal with us, United States, so we're gonna do a deal outside of the US dollar. Well, that's grounds for war, so we'll go to war if we have to or whatever. But in 2015, Russia and China started trading oil outside. Then, of course, Iran followed suit. And if you want to know what's going on with all these sanctions and all these things, just follow the money, right? So Iran followed suit, and now they started selling oil. And then the U.S. slapped sanctions on Iran, and nobody's allowed to work with Iran because they have sanctions, and we don't want them to sell oil outside the U.S. dollar. But what happened is in 2017, China became the largest oil importer. So now they're importing more oil than the United States. And then in 2018, the very next year, China launched their own petro-yuan. So just like we have a petrodollar, they have a petro-yuan now. And basically they're selling oil and they're pricing oil in the derivatives market on their dollar outside the US. So this has been happening over years and years and years and years and years. And you can see a couple of slides up there on the screen. It's been all over the news, but most people don't know where to pay attention to this or even what it means if they see it. Now, this has been continuing to escalate. And the reason why I'm making this video is because just last week, big news dropped, all right? This has been a slow and steady escalation. We've seen the US dollar have 100% reserve status and down to 80% and 70% and 60%. And now that final Bretton Woods time is starting to come closer and closer. And the escalation heated up this in the last week with Instex. And basically the EU made their own way for countries to trade outside the US dollar. They launched it back in January of 2019, but it finally became operational on June 29th. And so now the EU, which is France and Germany, the UK, and others, can all transact outside the US dollar. They don't have to use the SWIFT. If you ever sent a wire, use SWIFT. And SWIFT is how money transfers around the world, and that's what we'd lock people out of the SWIFT system. And now there's another option outside the SWIFT system, and they're already processing transactions. Now, why this is, well, it's important for a number of reasons, but why this is even way more important than just hearing about Iran and Russia and China. Well, Iran and Russia and China are enemies, all right? Those are our enemies. Now we're talking about our closest allies. We're talking about the countries that are supposed to have our back. So now our enemies, they've already been against us, right? They're already transacting outside the US dollar. But at least we had our allies. We had Germany, France, the UK, but now they're also, so now the US has slapped sanctions, so many people, pushed so many people out of the financial system that they have gone and created their own financial system. Yeah, it's crazy. If you like this video, if you like this kind of topic, if you'd like me to dig deep into this, give me some thumbs up on this video and share it. We need people to share this information because most people have no clue. And if you don't understand what's going on, you are going to be in a world of hurt. I don't want that to happen to you or anybody you know. So we're repeating the cycle, all right? We have seen this, just like in from the sterling with Britain to the US, we saw this slow and steady decline. We are seeing the same thing. Just like with Britain, how they went to war and they needed so much money, they became a debtor nation and the US became a creditor nation. The US has been fighting these wars and we've had to borrow money and we've become a debtor nation while China has become a creditor nation. And not only is China a creditor nation, then we have, countries like Russia, I talked about stockpiling gold, and they have almost no debt. We have all these countries now that are that have enormous wealth built up and no debt. Now, I'm not saying Russia is better than the USA by any means, but I'm just saying let's look at what is going on and understand where this fits into history and what this means, right? So we're seeing this slow and steady decline, and it's picking up steam. It's really starting to escalate right now, especially, like I said, June 29th, when this Instex went live. And unfortunately, most people aren't going to realize until it's too late, to do something. Now, what's going to happen? What's going to happen next, right? That's what we all want to know. So where should we position? Now, I think we might see something different than we saw last time where, we saw one currency take over for the next. I don't know if we're going to have one clear winner again this time. We might see different winners emerge. So as I've said, right, gold has been steady rising. It broke a 6-year high just recently. We know that the central banks have been accumulating massive amounts of gold. I don't know about the US, but all the other central banks of the world have been accumulating gold. As a matter of fact, I talked about 1971, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. When that happened, all the governments of the world went and bought gold. Well, last year they accumulated more gold than any time in history since 1971. They're accumulating. They know something's coming. So gold's going to continue to rise. I believe Bitcoin's going to continue to rise. I believe Bitcoin will become a world reserve currency. I believe it will become a global store of value. Maybe not in the next couple of years, but it will. And so we'll see gold continue to rise. We'll see Bitcoin continue to rise. And it's going to be extremely painful for those of you that aren't paying attention. So follow the leaders, see what the central banks are doing, and do the same thing. Pay attention. The US dollar's days, unfortunately, are numbered. Now, I'm a US citizen. I don't want this to be the truth. I would love to see the politicians in the United States have a change of heart, and I would love to see them become fiscally conservative, and I'd love to see them live within their means and cut the debt, and I would love for them to, reverse this. But I don't think it's going to happen. It's not possible. For one, I believe the damage is too far gone. They have their own systems outside the US dollar now. They're not coming back in. That's one. Two, the politicians aren't going to agree to become conservative all of a sudden, right? They're raising the debt ceiling every single time we turn around. And so I just don't think it's going to happen. So the US dollar's days are numbered. Now, other fiat looks horrible too. And that's why I don't see another currency just taking over for the US dollar because as bad as the US dollar is, it's still probably the best one out there. And so that's why I think it's going to be a new system. We're going to see some form of gold or some form of cryptocurrency or crypto-backed gold or Bitcoin that's going to take over. So I want you to invest accordingly. Now, I also want to hear what you think. Leave me some comments down below. I love to talk with each and every one of you in the comments. Give me some thumbs up if you like it, thumbs down if you don't. And like I said, please share the video with somebody that needs this. I don't want anybody to lose out over this, right? We want everyone to profit. And so that's it. To your success, I'm out.